So occupational therapy helps people all across the lifespan from birth until death live a more engaged and independent life. We look at the person, the environment, and what we call the occupation. So the occupation is anything you engage in to be productive in your life. It includes brushing your teeth. It includes driving your car. It's going to the driving range. It is hanging out with your friends at a restaurant. We help people who struggle with anything that they do in their life to do it better, more independently, and more successfully. We help children with developmental disabilities. We help people with traumatic brain injuries. We help little babies in the NICU and our grandmas and grandpas in hospice. So finding an occupational therapist that can be creative and attuned to the occupations that you, your child, and your family engage in and help you live your life to the fullest, it's going to be a fantastic relationship.
What are some common needs for OT for kids in the 0 to 3 range?
So some of the most common needs for kids in the 0 to 3 range is to be that early identification, right? We want to make sure that they're hitting all of their gross and fine motor milestones on time. So that includes, rolling over around 3 months, sitting up between 6 and 9 months, crawling around 9, and then walking anywhere from 12 to 15. If your child is not doing any of those, it's going to be really important that you consult with your pediatrician or a developmental specialist like an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to make sure that we can best support you guys and support your child's development, because kids all develop on their own timeline. I think it's really important for parents in this day and age of so much information overload to understand that if their child isn't crawling right on time, if their child isn't walking or talking right on time, sometimes that's okay because we all develop things differently. And we want to make sure that you are consulting with someone who's an expert in the field, like an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a speech therapist, your pediatrician, a teacher, right? Someone who has significant experience, clinical knowledge of that topic, to then help make the decision if therapy is needed or if therapy is not needed.
And is it ever too early to start OT if you have a child at risk or showing signs of delay?
Short answer is no. It is absolutely never too early to start. I think it's so important that we start kids out if they're starting to struggle, and we want to start supporting them so quickly, because as you develop, expectations just get harder, right? And if you're struggling in the very beginning, right, we're going to keep falling behind. And that would be, it's my worst fear as a pediatric specialist. It's, of course, the family's worst fear that the child will continue to struggle throughout their whole life. If they just need a quick burst of services so they can catch up and start being really successful, then let's give it to them as early as they need, And then on the other hand, if it's a child who has, a developmental disability, they're going to be needing supports their whole lives. Let's get them in, find a therapist you really love and start developing that amazing relationship that you have as soon as possible, because, why wait?
Okay, switching to elementary school. What are some common OT needs for elementary kids?
Some of the common needs that we see for kids in the elementary school age range, that's when you start seeing more of the academic demands. And so some of their teachers might pinpoint some things that they're having a hard time with in the classroom, or parents might see it at home. Some of those things include those early emerging pre-writing or writing skills. Social skills start coming up a little bit more, sensory processing, and also just some of those self-help ADLs, activities of daily living. So things like fasteners, buttons, snaps, starting to learn how to tie their shoes. As early as I'd say like kindergarten, once they start getting exposed to a lot of these things, what we see is kids who don't maybe pick up on them after months of teaching or pre-teaching and practice, then it's like, okay, now we need actual intervention to see how we can support some of these underlying skills.
And what do you see as some bigger and more unique OT needs for like middle and high schooler range?
I really love that you asked this question, because I think it's so important that kids in the older children, right, those middle schoolers, high schools, and then even into adulthood, get the supports that they need, right? As we get into middle school and especially in high school, we look at something called executive functioning. That really starts to be really the main skill that kids need to use in the school environment and in life, right? We're starting to manage our own schedule, bringing books to class, right? We have more homework that may be due in a week instead of the next day, right? We have more responsibilities at home, right? We're doing more chores around the house. We're starting to drive a car, right? And the executive functioning skills that are needed to do all those things is so strong.
With adults, it's the same thing. And I think this is something that kind of gets lost within the OT spectrum of services, and especially those younger adult years. So especially once children age out of these services, we kind of see a drop off, right? But there's still all these needs that Katie just identified that are there, the executive function needs, because then they're even greater. Can you hold a job independently? What kind of job do you even want? What are you interested in? What kind of environment are you going to thrive? As the OT, can I then go into that workplace and help support the team there to help them understand how this adult best functions? You're also going to see navigating relationships and all those kinds of skills that come in. I mean, as a neurotypical adult, I have difficulty navigating relationships. I know that for these adults, it's going to be even more of a challenge. So at that age, we're really starting to see more of the environmental adaptations. So giving a lot of coaching and education to the people that are working with that adult, but also then giving the adult the tools that they need to advocate for themselves as well.
And throughout a kid's life, like many kids make progress, but without continuous therapy and practice, they may regress. Are there some skills that should be practiced throughout the lifespan?
Yeah, so I think there are two different sides to this coin. One side of the coin is kind of what we've been doing for a really long time, is that a child is identified to need occupational therapy services. They're in services continuously until they either quote unquote age out, or they be, their parents feel good, the therapist feels good to discharge. That has been happening kind of since occupational therapy was founded during the World Wars. What we're seeing now is something called episodic care, where a parent comes to an occupational therapy clinic. They say, I'm having concerns with my child. They qualify for services. Then the therapist and the parent and the child collaborate on a set of goals. What do they really want to see their child do and succeed? Which that goal setting is happening in the traditional model, but in the episodic model, it's so important because that episode is for a shorter amount of time, typically around 12 to 16 weeks of therapy. We're going to work really hard on those goals. We're going to meet those goals as fast as we can. While we are meeting those goals in therapy, the most important thing about episodic care is that that parent and that therapist are working together. That therapist is empowering that parent that when that episode is over, they will continue to be as successful as they are on those goals when they leave. Now, when you leave an episodic care, you don't leave forever. I never discharge kids fully because development is always happening, right? Expectations are always changing. Circumstances are always changing. So after a quick break of services, which can be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to a year, to a couple years, right? If they're doing really well, then they can say, hey, we're having trouble with X, Y, and Z. Can we come back in and see you? Absolutely. So you come back in, you do a short catch up with your therapist, you establish those new goals, those new areas, and then you get started again on that 12 to 16 week burst. And then it's this really nice pattern of the therapist, the client, and the child so invested in those goals, meeting them so quickly, and then again letting the child be a child and not have their parent and have to take them to a million appointments after school. They can go to the park and go to baseball practice and have a childhood that we all love, right? So episodic care is kind of starting to shift the field of occupational therapy. It's so effective. I use it in my practice a lot. There's so much research coming out on it. It is a big change, but it's so beneficial.
With adults, how can adults progress and not do the same thing throughout the years?
Yeah, so I think it's so important to really have continual check-ins to make sure that the goals that you're working on are actually important to the adult. Because sometimes goals, especially I see this in school-based practice a lot, the goals just keep getting passed on, passed on, passed on because they're not meeting them. So they're just maybe reworded in a different way. But it's almost like, okay, well, is this goal even beneficial anymore? Is this something that maybe we need to look at this from a different lens and say, okay, this isn't important to this person. Let's reframe this and go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what's actually really important in this phase of life right now? What do you want to be working on? So that collaboration and understanding that therapy isn't therapist driven. It is very client centered. And we need to be making sure that we are working on goals that are meaningful and purposeful to our clients.
What age development stage should you start working on, like handwriting, forming letters with a pencil?
Love this question. And I worked in school-based practice for 8 years and now work in private pediatric. But the biggest thing that I learned and that I share with every family that is worried about this is it's very child-led when the child is ready, and making sure that they are approaching this in a playful and developmentally appropriate way. So working on those pre-writing skills in a really playful way. So using sensory trays or using puzzles and things like that, that whatever is motivating to the child. And when they're ready, they're going to start picking up a pencil. Always have it maybe as an option, but if they would rather use their finger to write for right now and do air writing or write on a sensory tray, great. But I really don't advocate for pushing it before it's developmentally appropriate, because the child might not be ready to grasp that pencil yet.
And I think a lot of parents think like, oh, my kid should be doing this. We should be up here. We should, like, how much for specifically a pencil grip, how much does it matter?
Yeah, and there's more research coming out about this. A lot of like, okay, do OTs spend way too much time focusing on how a child is holding a pencil? There is developmental merit to what we recommend and the developmental progression of pencil grip. However, kind of what we were talking about before on, should we be pushing the same goal over and over again? If at a certain point, those muscles just aren't quite developing the way that we maybe would like to see for a specific pencil grip, we're not going to push it anymore. Is it functional? We want to look at function. Is it serving the purpose? Maybe is it fatiguing them, or can they only write for short periods of time? Then we would transfer to more meaningful and purposeful ways of getting that writing out. And that could be typing or dictation or other adaptive ways of producing written work.
And so switching to writing, what stage is a good time to work on, or typing?
Again, it's child-led where they're at developmentally for this, because they also need to have the skill of bilateral coordination to be able to use both hands, the visual skills needed to see the keyboard and look for the keys that they need. So it might actually be that we do dictation before we would move to typing, if they have the speech skills for that.
And speaking on like speech skills, should an OT know about assistive technology to teach typing?
I think that having a general awareness, most OTs do. And I think one of the best things about OT is our creativity. So being able to have a pretty baseline knowledge of assistive technology, but then also hey, let's look this up together. That collaborative approach, and being open to doing the research and help families seek out the assistive technology that they need.
With like strengthening fingers, why is Play-Doh and finger painting so important?
So the main goal of why we encourage so much strengthening of the hands is to foster the grasp and also foster coordination. So we have these muscles in our palm called our intrinsic hand muscles. So most of these intrinsic hand muscles start and stop within our palm and then connect to our fingers, connect to our wrists and forearm. Okay. So doing things like finger painting, Play-Doh, the sponge painting I mentioned, using tweezers, tongs, a lot of those typical therapy toys you'll see in a gym, are strengthening those muscles, because those skills then translate to your pencil grasp, but so much more. There are things called your in-hand manipulation skills. I'm getting a little wordy here, but things called translation. So thinking about back in the day when we put coins in our parking meters, you had your handful of change and you needed to get that penny out of your palm and into your fingertips to put it in. We need that. We use it all the time. You don't even know it. Unlocking your apartment door, right? Using that's intrinsic and wrist muscles. Being able to type, so much intrinsic hand muscle strength that we need to use. There are so many everyday activities, tying, typing, texting on your phone. I mean, you use your hands all day. So starting with a really strong foundation in your hands is amazing. You need it. You absolutely need it.
I will add to that as well. I think why OTs push so much of this, especially with the burst in technology and with the COVID pandemic, there was a lack of play. And so we really, really want to give parents tangible, practical, easy tools at home that are not going to cause a mess, that are not going to cause any stress, that are just fun. And I think Play-Doh is like the catch-all for a lot of this because everyone has Play-Doh. And then like finger painting, it's like, okay, we can get some of that sensory piece in too, and really get them exploring and creating if you're wanting to have a little bit more of a messy, fun time.
Another thing too that you can do that will kind of surprisingly strengthen your hands is gross motor play. Take them to the playgrounds, encourage them to crawl around, reach monkey bars, climb the ladder, the rock wall, the cargo net, right? We're using our hands, we're developing that grip strength to then lift our bodies, which then in turn, strengthens that whole upper arm, shoulder girdle, chest, back, core stability, which is so important for school and sitting up and attending and life. So there's so much more you can do to strengthen our hands than just play with our hands, right? We can climb and play and things like that.
And why does it matter, or I guess, does it matter if kids can color in the lines?
Great question. Yeah, so I think some of the underlying skills that we're looking at when a child can color in the lines is both from a visual motor standpoint. So are they seeing where the lines are and can they match their motor movements to stay within those lines? That's really important. We use our visual motor skills for a lot of things, most importantly in childhood, writing, typing, playing games, things like that. When we kind of take away that visual motor skills, it looks at our coordination, right? How are we controlling our pencil? Are we controlling it with our shoulder and our whole arm? Is it our forearm? Is it our wrist? Is it our fingers, right? As kids develop, they're going to develop a little bit more coordination through that pathway, ending up being able to color with just their fingers, okay? So it's a huge thing of coordination and of those visual motor skills.
And why do OTs use adaptive scissors? When should a child learn how to use scissors?
This is a really good question. I'm glad that you asked this. And it also correlates to kind of what we were talking about with the assistive technology. And we've talked about a lot about adaptations. This is kind of OT's bread and butter. It's figuring out when we need to adapt the environment to the child's need and when maybe we can take away that adaptation and they can move on to something that's more just like your everyday run-of-the-mill tool. So adaptive scissors are really great for kids who are lacking some of those inner hand muscles that Katie was talking about. So it takes away some of the finger strength needed and just focuses on the palm strength. If you're just using the scissors that are loop scissors and all you have to do is squeeze or all you have to do is press down, but they're still kind of working on that skill itself. So they also get the visual motor piece, the coordination of holding the paper and then also cutting. So there's other skills being worked on when you're doing cutting. But adaptive scissors are really great to just start working on some of those foundational skills that they need. And then as they progress, you can try different things and kind of move up, grade up, and make it even harder and harder. And hopefully maybe eventually get them to using regular scissors, but maybe not. Maybe you've just found a tool that this is what they're going to use to be successful at this task for their life. And that's really the goal, is figuring out what is going to be successful for them.
And how can parents support their children's growth and progress in OT?
I think having a really close relationship with your therapist is the most important thing. And the other big thing I think that parents of children who come to OT need to know that if you're not vibing with your therapist, that's okay, right? We don't vibe with everyone we meet. And if you feel like your therapist isn't doing a good job of advocating for your child or for your child's needs, or, and that's okay. Have a conversation with them and say, hey, I think we're going to move on and look for someone else. And that's totally fine. And, it's happened to all of us at least once. But I think a really good thing is to come and ask questions, be involved in your child's care. I love when my parents are in my sessions with me because I can say, hey, did you see them do that right there? That's exactly what we're looking for. And this is why, and this is how you can do it again and again and again at home, right? I want you to be my partner. I want you to be right next to me, playing on the ground with the kids at therapy so you can learn so much more and then you can take it home with you.
Okay, I have one more question that I want to throw in there because I know, Catherine, you said you were a school OT for 8 years. What is something that can be worked on for school OT that most parents might not think of?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times school-based OTs get labeled as the handwriting teacher. And that was extremely frustrating for me because yes, handwriting is an indication of a whole host of things that could be going on with a child. So that's kind of a really great, like, hey, their handwriting's off, let's consult an OT. But I think what I wish parents knew more and maybe could advocate a little bit more in schools is beyond that. So I really loved push-in services because it allowed me in the school to be collaborating then with the teacher and recognizing that those pull-out services are maybe great one-on-one to work on a specific skill set, but actually the function in the classroom is the most important thing. Because then maybe I can get into the class and see, wait a second, their sensory overload is totally inhibiting them from being able to focus and pay attention in class, which is what their goal is. So being able to help the teacher then maybe adapt their seating or their environment to help it be more appropriate for their needs. And I think something else I really wanted to work on more globally in schools was just sensory processing and the idea and the understanding that it's not developmentally appropriate to be expecting kids to be sitting for so long, and normalize flexible seating, sensory breaks, making just a more general, globally sensory friendly school environment that promoted functional movement. And that wasn't singling out kids for specific things. Because I got a lot of, oh, this one kid in my class won't sit still. It's like, well, the whole class could be benefiting from movement breaks. You don't have to specifically tell him he needs a movement break. Get the whole class involved.